What's going on, everyone? Can you hear me okay? Okay, we're going to get started in just a second. Good? Okay. Alright, so welcome to the stream. If you saw the title, it's all about open source today. So if you have any questions related to open source, both in either philosophy of open source or open source software, or some other questions, then go ahead and put that in the chat. And I'll answer probably most of them live. It's not going to be a big stream today, so I'll probably be able to answer all the questions live, so that'll be good. The reason I wanted to talk about open source kind of on the stream is because it plays such a key role in software. You know, everybody that's done any project, either on the web or, if a lot of people probably in this chat are Python programmers. Of course, Python's open source. So right off the bat, if you're a Python programmer, then you're utilizing open source. But open source stretches way beyond that. And I want to talk about some of the stuff related to open source so people understand sort of its history, where it's going, some of the key players, and then some other questions about it. So I'm going to look at some questions and see if there's anything here. Best open source live stream. Well, actually, we're going to do a quick update first, and I'll get to this. I'll wait for some more questions to come in. So one announcement is that this is kind of a general engineer man announcement, not related to open source, but I had a larger project I was doing that I've concluded, which has freed up a lot of my time. So I intend to do more videos. I intend to get contests working, more challenges on EMKC, so you can expect that to happen. That's if you saw the polls recently on, I did a YouTube poll and then I did a poll on Discord. That was really because of freeing up all this time. So that's why I asked those questions. So I intend to get more content out for everybody. So that'll be good. And certainly I'll be working on EMKC as well, so that'll be fun. But channel's healthy, everything's great. I have a great video coming tomorrow. So be looking out for that. If you loved the Craigslist scammer video, you're going to really love the video that's coming out tomorrow. So be on the lookout for that. Okay, I see some questions pouring in. Let's check it out. Best open source live stream service, either broadcast or a program that distributes the broadcast to viewers. Well, I use a program called OBS, which is Open Broadcaster Studio, and I've been using that since the beginning. Of course, I do the production of all my videos, all my live streams, pretty much everything I do on Linux. That also includes projects that I do both professionally, personally, and open source. I do everything on Linux. So, of course, I'm going to use the open source version, OBS. So I would say that's probably the best one on Linux. I don't actually know of another one. It's possible that there are other open source streaming programs that work on other platforms, but the one that I use the most is OBS, so you should check it out. It's really good. I mean, if you like the quality of the videos and the quality of the streams and some of the stuff that you see on the screen, then you can do all that with OBS. Plus it supports chroma key for green screens. That way, you don't see everything behind me. Shreyas asked, how do you actually find projects to contribute to other than your own projects? So the best place to look, of course, is GitHub. And because GitHub has kind of solidified their position in open source as the top place, for social coding. Kevin Smith asked, why is Ruby so hated? So I don't think it's hated. I think I have an answer for that. I think the reason that Ruby is not used more is because Ruby is sort of they tried to do what Python did. And of course, Python was already out when Ruby came out, so it was tough to unseat Python. And then Ruby has really got propelled into the spotlight by way of Ruby on Rails, which is a web application framework. So you don't see a whole lot of I don't see a whole lot of Ruby outside of web applications that involve Ruby on Rails, and then like Metasploit exploits. Those are the two places I really only see Ruby. Outside of that, I don't see it used that often as I don't see people saying, "Oh, I'm going to use Ruby to do things I would have done with Python." So I don't think it's hated. I think it's just it got to the game late, and Ruby on Rails it's its only really huge thing. So, but it's a good language, especially if you're a web developer. You should check out Ruby on Rails if you haven't done that. But thank you for the question, and also thank you for the 2. Appreciate that. Yeah, so GitHub, if you haven't heard of GitHub, then you might have been living under a rock. GitHub has millions and millions and millions of repos and, public repos. Of course, they support private repos, but, we're only interested in the public stuff. We're interested in the open source stuff that people are putting out there for others to use, as well as, fostering a project along with their team and possibly sponsors or people funding their program, as well as requesting the community to help out with a particular project. So GitHub is the place to go. There's also GitLab. I mean, they're not as big as GitHub, but they do have a place where you can explore projects. There's not going to be as many. I know there's a lot more now that Microsoft took over GitHub, but it's not going to be at the size and scale of GitHub. And even on GitHub, I mean, you can, GitHub is not really a place where you can just, oh, I just realized it's not on my screen. Hold on. Oops, no Docker. There we go. Okay, I'm huge right now. I gotta make myself smaller. So GitHub is not just, you can click this Explore button. There's an Explorer at the top, and it lets you find repositories to work on. It's not just you go to your profile, you have your repos, and you can go contribute to the ones that you've forked or that you favorited, but there's also a place to explore. So, based on your interests, they'll use their algorithms to figure out, what you might want to look at. And then they have trending repos. You can set date ranges. There's also popular topics that you can look at. And then I'm pretty sure there's a way to actually specify, show me Python repos, show me JavaScript repos, show me, whatever I want to see. And then from there, you can just find things to work on that you think are, interested, or things that you're interested in. So it's not just, it's important to understand that GitHub is a lot larger than just your repos. You can certainly find other repos here. Make myself bigger again. There we are. Thank you for that question, though. Did you make the chase.io repo on GitHub for this stream? No. So I'm working on a TCP game, real-time game, like a browser game. If you ever played like spinner.io or paper.io or something like that, I'm working on a game that's chase.io, where you're chased and you go and eat dog treats and shoot the dog treats at people. So I'm working on that. That's what that's going to be. But that's way down the road. I'm not that far into that. How is open source security secure? So really, that's actually a broader topic. I was going to talk about that later, but this is probably a good segue to talk about that. So as far as open source security, it's kind of a double-edged sword. You have one group of people that will say, well, open source must be less secure because the source code is available, which means hackers can just look at the source code and develop exploits according to source code that they can see. So that's one group of people. Another group of people say that because software is open source, it puts more eyes on the problem. Then of course you have the proponents that say, well, if it were closed source, it's limited to just a group of people. So, I'm of the opinion that open source is better because there's more eyes on the problem. And with bigger software that's closed source, take Microsoft Windows for instance. I mean, do you actually think that if Microsoft discovered a flaw in their code that they're going to actually tell you? So a lot of people will say, well, you never see the level of security problems in closed source software that you do in open source software. Well, of course you don't, because they're not going to tell you that. Why would they come out and say, we found this mega huge security exploit, for when all they're going to do is just push a patch. But if you've had Windows for any amount of time, then you already know that they're constantly pushing updates, security updates all the time. And you think those are just routine security updates? No, it's they're finding stuff and they're fixing it. Christopher Riley said, "Take my money, keep making content." Thanks a lot for the $2. I appreciate that. And I will continue making content because I love making content. I love doing the streams. I love making the videos. I love helping people out. So that's what's important to me. So thank you so much for that. And know that I will keep making content until I have no more air in my lungs. So yeah, I mean, you got to make your own determination on security, but that's sort of my and again, this is all opinion based. There are some facts in there, but it's mostly just opinion based that I think that's better. It's just I don't know. I personally have a distrust for vendors like Microsoft, and therefore I don't believe that they're being transparent about the whole thing anyways. So I guess you gotta decide what's better: seeing the code and having 10,000 eyes on it, in the case of something like the Linux kernel, or just trusting a group of developers behind closed doors to just make everything right and do the right thing. So that's a personal decision that you have to make. What is the best place to find Python packages? Probably just pip. You can use pip to get it, which I think pulls from. I actually don't know. I don't know if it's pulling from a pip repo or PyPy, something like that. I'm not sure. Gmove says, "Is it ethically okay to clone somebody's project and change it slightly to serve a different function and make a profit from that project?" And the answer is possible. I would say ethics doesn't have a whole lot to do with it. We're actually going to talk about licenses here in a little bit, open source licenses and how all that works. But there are, if a piece of open source software is really free and open, then that implies that you can take that code and do anything you want with it according to the license. So if you find a piece of code that has a really permissive license, meaning that you're able to do whatever you want with it, then not only would it be ethically okay, it would be legally okay for you to take all of that source, integrate it into a new project, and then sell it. And it's you're kind of already doing it today. Like if you have a MySQL database, you're using open source software and you're selling that as part of a bigger project. But we're going to talk about licenses more in a second, so just hang tight on that. But the short answer to your question is probably. There are certain licenses where it would be against the license to take somebody's code, integrate it into a commercial project if you did not then reapply the code. But there's also ways to sell open source without actually selling the software. We're going to talk about that as well. Okay, I'm skimming just for open source software, open source questions at the moment. Okay. Inubov, right? I don't know if I got that name right. I'm sorry. How do I start to contribute to open source projects? Just hold off on that. That's actually one of the primary topics of this video is how to contribute something to somebody's repo. So we'll do that in just a second. Okay, so I'm going to move on to I have some talking points, like specific things that I wanted to do. So let's just jump into that. Oh, gotta put that back up. I'm getting a ping in question board. Sorry, the message might snap. Okay, so I have some talking points that I wanted to talk about because these are sort of key to open source. And the first thing is you've probably heard about this thing called, free and open source, FOSS, F-O-S-S, free and open source software. And some people think that the word free in that context means free, no cost. And that's not really what it means. When we're speaking about free and open source software, we're speaking about software freedom rather than software cost. So if so there's two types of free, of course. There's free cost software. That's like freeware. I make my software, I compile it, I give you it at no cost, and that's the end of that. But you don't get the source. We would call that free cost software, but we wouldn't call that free software in the context of software freedom. So when we speak about software freedom, we're specifically how the Free Software Foundation speaks about software freedom. They're talking about 4 fundamental freedoms, and I have them here. So according to the Free Software Foundation, there's 4 fundamental freedoms that make software, actually free, as in freedom. And the first one is the freedom to run the program as you wish, and that's freedom 0. So that means that you get a program and you're able to do whatever you want with that program without limitations. You can use it for any purpose. You can run it for any purpose. You can run it as much as you want, as little as you want. That would be freedom 0. Freedom 1 is the freedom to study how the program works and change it so it does your computing as you wish. And of course, this particular freedom is a precondition for this is going to be access to the source code. So the source code must be made public for people to download and study how it works and change it and do whatever you want with it. So that's kind of a fundamental thing about open source, is the ability to have the source code. If the source code is not public and you're not able to get it, then right off the bat, you are not free to do whatever you want with that stuff. The freedom 2, and of course they're doing it in arrays start at 0 order. Freedom 2 is the freedom to redistribute copies so you can help your neighbor. So if I have software, I should be able to take that software and give it to a friend. And that should be okay according to the software's rules. As you know, there's lots of software where you cannot do that. Like, I cannot take a copy of Windows 10 and give it to a friend. I'd be likely committing a crime or violating some license. So we would call, of course, Microsoft Windows non-free, as in no freedom. So the final one is the freedom to distribute copies of your modified version to others. So this is kind of a combination of 1 and 2. This is saying that you should be able to change the software and then distribute that software to others. And again, the source code must be available to make this happen. So the Free Software Foundation says if your software meets all 4 of these requirements, then it is, according to the Free Software Foundation, free and open source software. But this has nothing to do with cost. You can actually sell open source software, and that's okay. So let's talk about that now. So I get this question a lot, and it's how do people make money from open source software? How can they afford to do it? And really what they're doing is they're selling the knowledge. And this is true of a lot of different projects. So you obviously cannot, you could sell open source software. Like, I could download the Linux kernel and sell it to you, but why would you buy it when you can just download it from anywhere. So it's not that you can't do it, it's not practical for you to do it. There are times where people will sell the software, but what they're selling is the distribution of the software. So like I might tell you, I will sell you a DVD with the Linux kernel on it, but you must pay me 50 cents to cover the cost of the disk. So that happens often. But most times the way people sell open source software is they sell the knowledge associated with it. So one good example would be, Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So they base, of course, all their work on the Linux kernel, and then they sell this sort of enterprise offering along with all the support and the package maintenance and all the stuff that's not really part of the Linux kernel along with it. And of course, if you want Red Hat Enterprise Linux, you can get it for free by downloading CentOS, Community Enterprise OS. And that's a way of getting the binary identical version of Red Hat Linux, but completely for free. And that's good if you don't want to pay for all the other stuff. But Red Hat's a huge company, and they are a huge company because they sell the knowledge, and they sell package management, and they sell support, and they sell deployments, but they're not actually selling the Linux kernel itself. They're selling everything around it that supports your operation. So this is true of several other projects as well. Another one would be GitLab, for instance. So GitLab makes their entire thing free and open source, but they sell a bigger edition that contains other stuff. They also sell a hosted solution, and that's a way of, again, making money on your open source software. So, really what they're doing is they're saying, we're the pros at GitLab. We made the software, we're the pros at all this. So if you want like an on-premise solution and you want that fully managed by us, or if you want, custom development, then of course those are going to be the guys to get that, from, and then they're able to sell that as a service. But again, they're not, nobody is selling core GitLab. They're selling everything around it. And then, things like, so another question I get a lot is, how are individual developers paid? And most of the time they aren't, especially on smaller projects. So like the Linux kernel, for instance, there's tens of thousands of developers, and a lot of them are being paid, but they're not being paid as a result of the Linux kernel itself. Like for instance, part of the Linux kernel is a bunch of device drivers for a bunch of different things. So like maybe there's a device driver for Broadcom, for network drivers. And the people over at Broadcom are the ones paying employees to put their drivers into the Linux kernel. So in a way, the people that are contributing to the Linux kernel in the context of Broadcom are being paid by their own employer. And Broadcom is likely doing this because they know that if they don't do this, nobody's going to buy their network cards. Of course, Linux might not be super popular on the desktop, but it is super popular in the cloud. And who's going to put a Broadcom network card in a server if Broadcom is not being a good steward of their drivers in the Linux kernel? So that's a way where, there's probably, I don't know exactly how many developers are in the Linux project. I have to imagine in the thousands, if not tens of thousands. But probably 50% of those people right off the bat are being paid through their employer to make device drivers for the Linux kernel, as well as, and remember, that's an ongoing thing because as they make new hardware, they got to make new drivers, and they got to put those into the kernel. So, but then you have people in the Linux kernel who are actually paid by, say, the Linux Foundation. Of course, Linus Torvalds, along with probably all of his lieutenants, people like Greg Crow-Hartman, these people are all probably on the payroll of the Linux Foundation because they are kind of the key people for that project. And then the question becomes, well, how does Linux Foundation make money? And the answer to that is a lot of different sources. They sell training, they sell subscriptions for various things. They have just an individual member yearly membership fee. That's something that I do. Like, I give them, I think it's $50 a year for membership. That's how I have an @linux.com email. And then there's also donations that come in from other big companies to just foster the development of Linux, because companies are all about, they want to keep their own businesses moving forward. So if you're somebody like Dell or IBM or HP who are creating these high power servers that they expect to be deployed in the cloud environment, then you'd be cutting off your own leg to not make sure that the software that's going to be deployed on those servers is not the best it can be. Because if it's not, then who's going to buy your servers? So it makes sense for these people to foster the continued development of something that's so important to their business. Okay, I'm going to take a second just to address some. There's a lot of questions here, so I'm going to answer a few of them. Have you ever participated in Hacktoberfest? Yes, I usually do that. I've done it every other year for the past probably 4 years. Ooh, it's a good question. X10 Creeper said, I have a question. Is it useful to have a professional GitHub to get jobs? And the answer to that is yes. I know that when I hire people for projects, when I'm in a position where I'm hiring people, one of the first things that I say is, show me your GitHub. And sometimes their answer is, well, I don't have one. I don't do any projects that are open source. I don't do any projects outside of my professional life, and that's okay, but that tells me a little something about the person. It tells me that they are only interested in programming as a professional occupation and not as a side thing. So in that case, that's negative points for that person, according to where I sit. So, but then you get people that say, yeah, I got my GitHub, check it out. I got like 10 projects, I got stars, I got contributions, I'm opening issues. I'm thinking like, wow, this guy really cares about his trade. He really cares about what he's doing, and he's contributing to open source, something that he doesn't have to do and is likely doing without pay. So that's really cool. Positive points for that guy. So to answer your question, yeah, you should. Your GitHub should look nice because somebody's going to ask you about it, and you're going to provide it, and you're not going to want to be embarrassed about what's on it. Horace Smith, is it smart to use open source libraries and projects with high security requirements? This is a good question. And the answer to that question is, it depends on the compliance that your software requires. So there's going to be cases where you have to comply with some regulations or laws that open source software simply cannot meet. And in that case, you don't really have a choice but to buy, commercial off-the-shelf software, or some high-priced software like Oracle or something like that. So whether it's smart or not, smart is a matter of opinion. How do you feel about open source software? Is it secure enough? In my opinion, yes, because there's so many eyes on it. But it's like, what requirements do you actually have to meet? That's going to drive whether or not you should actually use it. Do you think Microsoft Windows should be open source? I think that they would never do that, but because that would totally kill their business model. I suppose they could offer support, but if it's open source, people would just use the open source version without buying it. And the reason Microsoft is so rich is because they sell this software for a lot. Do I think it should be open source? I don't really care if it's open source, because I think, at least for me, Windows is irrelevant outside of gaming, outside of the one game that I play. and so it doesn't matter. I think they should make a maybe there's a way to, allow more people to get eyes on it and audit it and make sure it's okay. But the thing is, like, your average user, your grandma or your grandpa might use Windows, or your parents, and do you think they actually care? Do you think they're security minded, like we are? And the answer is probably not. I know my father doesn't. He doesn't care about security. He just does whatever on his computer, and whatever happens happens. If he gets scared that his computer is trying to steal his stuff, he just unplugs it from the wall, and brings it to me. But outside of that, he doesn't really care about security. So, and Microsoft knows that. They know that their target market is not the tech savvy developer. Their target market is corporations that need tens of thousands of copies, college students, just your typical family that just has a computer in their home. They're not gearing their stuff towards towards the high power developers, power users. Is Linux better for programming than Windows and Mac? I think it is, because there's better support for programming software, but I suppose if you're just using it to edit code, then it doesn't matter what you use. Why should you start computing? I'm sorry, why should you start contributing? Sanad Kadu said, why should I start contributing? You should start contributing for a number of reasons. Number one, it'll get you exposure to new software. It'll get you exposure to new people, for networking, if you're into that sort of thing. It will get you some projects in your open source portfolio. That way, when people go to check out what you've done, you'll certainly have that there, and it's going to feel good. It feels good to give back to the open source community when you are using a lot of open source software. Anybody that uses VS Code or Atom, you're using open source software. If you've ever logged into a Linux server, you're using open source software. If you're using your web browser that you're watching this on, Google Chrome, you're using open source software in the form of the Chromium project. So everybody uses open source software every day of their life, whether they realize it or not. So as a developer, one of the good things you can do to foster that is contribute to a project that you're interested in. And you don't have to contribute to something random. Don't go out there and just find some project just to say, oh, I worked on open source. Find projects that you're interested in. There's millions of them. So find the one that is related to the stuff that you're interested in and just work on that. Okay, so we're moving on to a couple other things. I want to talk about licenses a little bit. This is an important topic. So we have our page here, and it's going to be open source licenses. And really what I want to show here is there's a lot of different ones, and they range from highly permissive to not so permissive. So we'll start at the bottom. And when you do an open source project, you don't have to do a license, but you do have to do a license if you want people to use your code in a particular way. So, but if you don't use a license, then your code is considered in the public domain. People can use it literally however they want, do whatever they want with it. So there's two things that are common across all licenses, and that's a limitation on liability and a limitation on warranty. So, and every single license that you find on there is going to have these sort of canned statements in here that says, we're not responsible for what you do with the software, and we offer no warranty. If you use our software and your computer catches fire, then we are not responsible. So that's common across all licenses for open source software. But past that, there's also some commonalities on the permissions, and that's you're good to use it in commercial applications, you're good to distribute it, you're good to modify it, and you're good to use it privately. and you'll see that this is true of all these licenses. All of those have those things that are part of it. So now it just comes into these conditions. And this is sort of the things that must be met when you use a particular license. And you notice that the higher up in the page we get, the more conditions there are. And that's because at the bottom here, we have the most permissive one, the unit license. And that's a license with no conditions whatsoever, which dedicates works to the public domain. I don't know why the unit license even exists, because if you just do nothing, actually, you know what the unit license is good for? Establishing that you're not liable for anything that happens. So that's probably a good use of that. So above that, you have the MIT license. This is a popular one if you do a project that you want all the code to be out there, you want people to use it in whatever way they choose, to change it however they want, but the one thing that you want them to do is to retain the license notice and the copyright notice. So that means that your name will stay on there. You know, copyright Brian, you know, copyright Engineer Man, copyright whatever, then that has to be retained, but it can be distributed, you know, under different terms, you know, without source code. So going up is the Apache license 2.0, which is similar to the MIT license with one change, and that any changes, you know, must be documented. So going up to Mozilla public license, you know, this is kind of a new one. It's the same license. You know, permissions of this weak copy of license are conditioned on making available source code of the license files and modifications of those files under the same license. And that's key, because the other ones, like the MIT license, you can take somebody's code, use it in your project, and then license it under a different license. But the Mozilla Public 2.0 does not allow that. You have to keep it as the same license. So that's very important. So now we're in the GNU LGPL, GPL, and AGPL, and this is where it gets a little more restrictive, but it's still fine as long as you're okay with everything being open source. What a lot of these deal with is the code must always be available. And one more so than the other. The AGPL says that if you interact with software over a network, so basically if it's anything related to the web or anything that's network connected, then you immediately have to release all the code and all modifications as open source. And this is actually the license I used for EMKC, because it was important that nobody take that software and go use it for their own gain. You know, I wanted that to be part of the community. So I actually used the least permissive license for that to ensure that anybody that used that software, including their modifications, must release it as open source. And I was hoping that that would just cause people to work on the one project to make that the best it could be. So these are good when you want to ensure things remain open source with the same license, and you know, that's that. But they all have a lot in common. You know, they can all be used for commercial, distributed, modified. You know, some are good for patent use, and all of them contain no liabilities or warranties. So you got to pick the license that's best for you. Generally speaking, I'm a fan of the MIT license. For things that you just want out there and you know that you don't need to, you know, like you're not trying to preserve it in any way, MIT is a good choice for that. That's the license that I mostly use for my open source software. All right, bring that over here. Let me look at, see if there's any new questions. It's my Satoshi Nakamoto. Career at Bitcoin. Career at Bitcoin is in my stream. How to learn coding from open source projects. So you can, I mean, you're going to learn coding by modifying, you know, software. So there's one project that I like. It's called Sequelize.js, and one way that you can get going, kind of with, let me load this up. Hold on. So this is an ORM that I use in Node.js, and for instance, if you wanted to get involved in this project, you could come here and you can look at their issues. And issues are going to be things that everybody reports as, either feature requests or problems with with something. And then the quickest way to contribute to a piece of open source software is to look in their issues and say, all right, big int gets stored with incorrect precision after upgrading to v5. So you look in here, and then you look at the bug report, and then all you have to do at this point is copy this software, modify it to fix this problem, and then submit a pull request to that repo to get it included into the project. And in doing so, you will have contributed to an open source project in a meaningful way. But to your point about how you can learn coding from open source is in fixing this problem, you learned some JavaScript, you probably learned some of the Node.js libraries, you probably learned about low-level database interaction, and in doing that, you learn stuff by doing this. So anytime you contribute to open source is going to be an opportunity for learning coding or technology or many things beyond that. Peter will there ever be an open source cloud computing service? So I don't really know what that means. I don't know if you mean maybe clarify that in the chat. I don't know if you mean will there ever be a there are things that are open clouds in that they're open I guess there's open cloud platforms. You'll never get say free you'll never get something like excuse me just one moment. Okay, I'm really sorry for that interruption. I had to tend to a urgent matter. All right, sorry, got distracted there. Let me get back on task here. So the last thing I want to talk about is how the actual process to contributing to software. So how you would open how you'd open a PR. So if you're ready to contribute to a project, this is how you would sort of do that. So if I want to contribute to SQLize, for instance, the first thing you want to do is first make a GitHub if you don't have one. The second thing is you need to make a fork of this repo. And what a fork is right now the SQLize repo is stored in the SQLize version. I'm sorry, the SQLize organization. When you do a fork, you click fork, and it says you've already forked. Oh, I've already forked it. Okay, let's pick a different project. Let's do github.com/, we'll do the Linux kernel. So if I want to make a modification to the, oh, this is a bad, yeah, they accept pull requests, but it's not, they're not real. So I'll click fork, and it says, where should we fork Linux? You know, realtux. So you pick realtux, and it forks it. So what this does is it transfers Torvalds Linux to realtux Linux. And then that's going to be my version of the Linux repo. So once it does that, then what I can do is I can clone my version of the Linux onto my computer. And then that's what I'm going to do here. Hopefully this finishes in just a second. While it's finishing, I'm going to get a terminal open here. The heck? It's taking so long. So what this is doing is it's actually making a full copy of the repo. It's a big repo, so I guess that makes sense why it's taking so long. And then what will happen now is I'll make my change, and I'll be pushing it to my own version of the Linux repository. And the reason I have to do that is because I can't push directly to the Linux repo like the real one. And because that'd be ridiculous if I could do that. Imagine if anybody could push to any repo. You know, you would make your open source software, somebody would come in and would just push stuff to it and just ruin it. So that can't be how it works. You know, there has to be control on who can add code to different repositories. I probably shouldn't have picked such a large repo. Oh good, I got it now. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to clone this. So I'm going to take this URL, git clone, I'll do like Linux test. Oh, it's so large. I made a mistake picking such a large repo. Yeah, so Linux repo is huge. Of course, it has 826,000 commits. It's gigantic. But anyways. Okay, I don't want to wait for this. I'm just going to pick some random repo. So we'll do like this guy. It's got 3 stars. So I'm going to fork his repo to realtux. This repo is small, so it should be instant. Okay, so it's done. So now if I want to contribute to this, I'm going to clone this, realtux, rewrite. So I'll clone that, it's done. So I can look at his code now. I have a version on my computer that is a copy of this repo. And if I want to actually submit something to it, what I'll do is I'll now do my work. So, you know, I'm just going to modify the README file, for instance. So I could see that, you know, there's a little space here. So I'm just going to take out 1 space. That's going to be my whole change to his software. So I'll save it. I can do a git diff. And the git diff shows me that I changed this 1 line and I just removed 1 space, and that's my entire contribution to his software. So at this point, I'm going to commit my changes. Git commit, removed space from beginning of line. Oh, I got to add it. So now when I push this software up, you'll see that it does succeed. It's going to let me push, but it's letting me push to my fork of his repo. And in that case, it's not actually in his repo yet, it's in mine. So you'll see when I refresh, it says realtux remove space from beginning of line 20 seconds ago. However, if I go to his fork, you'll see that it's his commit from 8 hours ago. So we can think of his repo as being here and my repo as being one commit ahead of his now. So the last step is to get your changes into his repository. And the way you do this is you do it through what's called a pull request. So to do a pull request, you go to the repo that you want to merge your changes into. So Ruben J01 rewrite. I go to pull request, and then you click new pull request, and then you're going to click this button that says compare across forks. And that's because you want to actually, pull requests are generally from branches to branches, but GitHub supports from other user branches to other user branches. So in this case, compare across forks, and you're saying the base repo is going to be rewrite, the base branch will be master, the head repository will be realtux rewrite, and the compare will be master. And this will show you what's changed. So this shows that the current file has a space, my version has no space. And it shows what has been changed. So this is showing you a difference between his repo and my fork of his repo. So once you've set all this up and you're ready to rock, you simply do create pull request, remove space from beginning of line. I'll just say you can ignore this. I did it for my live stream on YouTube. So I'm going to create a pull request here. And then that's it. So it's now up to that guy on whether or not he wants to actually accept this change into his repo. So he'll probably get an email at this point. He'll get an email that there's a new pull request on his repository, and then he can decide whether or not he wants to accept that into his repository. Now the other thing he can do is he can look at what the commits are. He can look at the diff between the two repos, and then if he wants, he can add comment, or he can comment on a particular line of code. He can say, oh, you took out a space, but I really wanted that space there, so I'm going to cancel your pull request. And then, but one of three things is going to happen. He's either going to ignore it, he's going to accept it as is, or he's going to kick it back with changes. And then that's sort of how it works. Now, if you become a major contributor to a project, you might be asked to. Oh, he just replied to me. That's funny. Hey, my thing is live. Ignoring your request to ignore this. It's funny. So they must know that it's live. Maybe they're watching this. That's funny. So, or he could just accept it as is, kick it back. But if you do enough work, oh, see, he merged it. So he merged it while we're online right now. He closed the PR and he merged it as is, and now I'm actually glad he did that, because now I could just show you how it works. So now if I go to his version of the repository, you could see that there's a new merge commit by syntax error. And if we look in the commits, we can see that I made a commit 4 minutes ago, and then syntax error made a merge on that. And then now my space that I removed is no longer in their README. And I can see that here. If I look at the README and I look at the raw, you can see that space is no longer there. So I've successfully contributed to an open source project. And you can see it went pretty fast. And I didn't arrange this. Like I didn't I didn't ask these people ahead of time, hey, can you be online to merge my code in? You could see that I made a contribution to their project. Of course it was a stupid one, but within 5 seconds? Or within not 5 seconds, within a few minutes they were already in here, and they closed it out. So now my contribution shows as merged, and the issue shows as closed, and that's kind of the end of that. So thanks Ruben J01 for being a good sport. I apologize, I don't actually know what your project does, but maybe somebody will. Yeah, it's not much, but it's honest work. Can you improve somebody's GUI? Of course. You can improve anybody's software that's open source. I mean, you can even improve people's software if they don't want it improved. It's just a matter of will they accept it or not. Of course, some people put their software on GitHub without the intention of actually accepting any pull requests, and this does happen occasionally. So, you're not always. I mean, don't be. I guess that brings us to another point. Like, don't get discouraged if you submit a pull request and it doesn't get accepted, or it doesn't even get looked at, because a lot of software is not. They don't have it on there so you can collaborate. They have it on there just to make it available to people. And I even have projects that if somebody were to submit me a pull request, I'm probably just going to ignore it just because it's not a project that I want pull requests on. So this brings us to our final topic, and it's if you are creating a new open source project, what can you do to give it the most likelihood of getting worked on? So the last thing we're going to talk about here is contribution guidelines. So again, we're going to go back to Sequelize because it's a good project. And on the Sequelize project, you could start by looking in the README. So in the README here, I don't actually see a contribution guidelines. So now I'm going to do is I'm going to look in their repo for something. Oh, I got it right here. So contributing. So you click on contributing, and then in here it's going to show you kind of what you should do. So issues are always welcome. After all, they're a big part of making Sequelize better. However, there's a couple things you can do to make the lives of developers much easier. Then they talk about pull requests, and they say explain the issue your PR is solving. Make sure all the tests pass. Like, they're going to tell you how to contribute properly to this project. And as long as you follow this, you can contribute effectively to a given project. And then they usually give you instructions on how to contribute. Prepare your environment, install your dependencies, get your database. They'll probably tell you how to run tests. They'll tell you how they want the coding standards done, and they'll tell you everything you need to know about a given project to be effective in contributing to it. And yeah, they got coding guidelines, so they have a ESLint, JSON file to talk about the coding guidelines. And then they have some information for maintainers about publishing a release. And if you want people to work on your project, make sure you have these, because if you just have a blank README with a project, nobody's going to care about it, because number one, they're going to assume that it's not maintained anyways, and number two, they're not going to know how to work on it. So if you want people to help you with your project, make sure you tell people how you would like them to work on your project. And then, of course, be active on your project. If you start a project and you just let it die, then nobody's going to work on it. It's all about momentum. Okay, we got a few minutes left, about 5 minutes. I'm just going to answer any final questions, and then we're going to wrap up here. Toby asked, how enforceable are any of these? I assume you're referring to the licenses. I mean, they're all enforceable just as any licenses. It's just, do you really want to enforce it? There's no like free software police that's going to throw you in free software jail, suddenly. So it's the kind of thing where, somebody has to go make it a big deal. So if you're using software and they all have different licenses, how do you then license your own code that you made? Do you just take the most restrictive license? So if the license doesn't make you use a specific license, then you can just license your portion of the code under whatever license you want. However, you couldn't license it under, there could be like contradictory licenses whereby, if you had code under a license that required that license to remain intact, you couldn't then use a license that would require that all other code with it operates by that same license, so that could be a problem. And as far as what you would do in that case, I don't know. Now it's a legal question. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know exactly. I try to stay away from convoluted license battles. Can the project owner run your changes before accepting your pull request? Toby asked as well. Absolutely. So one of the things they should do if it's a big project is they should first, if they have automated tests, they can certainly do that. But the other thing they can do is they can check out your branch, and then they can test what you did before they merge it in. And like that's what I do on EMKC. If somebody submits a change, what I do is I'll pull their change down to my machine, and then I'll test it out. Rob asks, if you forked a project before but it's out of date now, how do you update it again? I think there's actually a button on there. Don't quote me on this. There's 3 ways you could do this. I think there's a button to just say, bring my fork up to speed. But if that doesn't work, one of the things you could do is you could pull both projects down to your machine and then just merge the one branch over to your branch and just push that up. It should just be a fast forward merge, and that would bring it up to speed. The other thing you can do is just nuke your fork and just fork it again. But I think there's a button that allows you to just push it over. Okay, I think that's it for the stream. We're at about 1 hour and 1 minute. So hopefully I got to cover everything I wanted to cover, so that's good. Hopefully everybody has a better understanding of open source, and I urge everybody to get out there and explore projects. I urge you to contribute on projects. If the responsiveness of our friend Ruben J01 is any indication on the responsiveness of other projects, it shouldn't take you that long to get your changes, into where they need to be, as long as you've submitted something meaningful that follows their contribution guidelines and does something helpful to them. So get out there and check it out. On another note, if you're not on the Engineer Man Discord server, you should come check it out. There's a lot of really smart people on there. We're about 5,000 people, and we're talking about coding all the time. I'm on there a lot, as well as very knowledgeable staff. We have arguably the best curated programming Discord on the planet, from what I've seen. So if you're not on there, check it out. It's discord.gg/engineerman. There'll be a link. I'll put a link there. So you can come check it out. Other than that, we got a video tomorrow. It's gonna be an amazing video. So make sure you check that out. And that's really it. I hope to see everybody there. If there's any follow-up questions on the stream, just put them in Discord, and I'll see you guys there. Have a fantastic rest of your weekend, and thanks for tuning into the stream. I'll catch you later.